Imagine being trapped in space, and the thing you brought back to study suddenly stops being quiet. It starts moving, fast. It's smart, it's angry, and no one knows how big it'll get, or if anyone will make it home. Stay with me now. Welcome to Peak Plot Recaps. Today, I'm going to explain a horror sci-fi thriller film, Life, directed by Daniel Espinosa. This movie has 6.6 out of 10 IMDb rating. And if you've ever wondered what would happen if humans found alien life and it went horribly wrong, this movie answers that question in the most terrifying way possible. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe button. And now, spoilers ahead. In the near future, a space probe called Pilgrim 7 is on its way back from Mars with soil samples that scientists hope might contain the first evidence of extraterrestrial life. Unfortunately, as the probe approaches Earth's orbit, it gets damaged by space debris and veers dangerously off course. The 6-member crew of the International Space Station, a $200 billion achievement in orbit for 30 years, is tasked with intercepting the Pilgrim 7 before it crashes or drifts away forever. The team includes Dr. David Jordan, a medical officer who's been in space for nearly 473 days, Dr. Miranda North, a quarantine officer from the CDC, Rory Adams, a hotshot engineer, Commander Ekaterina Kat, the station leader, Sho Murakami, the systems specialist whose wife is about to give birth back on Earth, and Hugh Derry, an exobiologist who's paralyzed from the waist down. The station is tense as they prepare for the dangerous intercept mission. Rory suits up for a spacewalk to manually control the robotic arm and catch the speeding probe. His instructions are clear. If he can't capture the probe safely, he must push it into deep space rather than risk it hitting Earth with unknown contents. The crew helps Rory gear up, and everyone rushes to their positions. Kat and Sho monitor the operation from the command center, while David tracks Rory's vital signs. Hugh waits anxiously, who will be examining whatever they find. Rory floats outside the station and makes his way to the mechanical arm. The tension builds as they spot the Pilgrim capsule approaching at high speed. Rory carefully positions the arm, but when the capsule makes contact, the entire station jolts violently. For a moment, everyone thinks the mission has failed, but Rory announces he's successfully caught the probe. The next day, the team carefully moves the Martian soil samples to the quarantine lab. Hugh, despite his disability, he begins examining the samples for any signs of life. After careful analysis, he discovers what appears to be a dormant single-cell organism in the soil, potentially the first proof of extraterrestrial life ever found. The organism doesn't respond to normal conditions, so Hugh attempts to reanimate it by recreating Mars' ancient atmosphere with higher carbon dioxide, less oxygen, and a temperature around 20 degrees Celsius. To everyone's amazement, the cell begins to show signs of life, moving slightly under the microscope. The crew can barely contain their excitement. This tiny organism represents the most important scientific discovery in human history, proof that we're not alone in the universe. News of the discovery reaches Earth, and there's a worldwide celebration. During a video call with elementary school children, the kids are given the honor of naming the organism. They choose Calvin after their school, Calvin Coolidge Elementary. As the days pass, Hugh makes an astonishing discovery. By day 12, Calvin has grown rapidly into a multi-celled organism with remarkable properties, where each cell can function as muscle, neuron, and photosensitive cells all at once, allowing every cell to see, think, and move independently. It's unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary history. Calvin continues to grow, developing appendages and responding to stimuli. By day 25, it's about the size of a small flower and has even started interacting with Hugh, who's clearly developed an attachment to the organism. The rest of the crew is more cautious, especially Miranda, whose job is to ensure that any potential extraterrestrial life remains contained. Then disaster strikes. An atmospheric accident in the lab causes Calvin to become dormant. Hugh blames himself, while Commander Kat feels secretly relieved about Calvin's rapid growth. Against Miranda's advice, Hugh decides to revive Calvin using mild electric shocks. The first few attempts do nothing, but suddenly Calvin comes back to life and immediately wraps itself around Hugh's hand. Hugh tries to pull away. Calvin's grip tightens with incredible strength. The crew watches in horror as Calvin begins crushing Hugh's hand, hand, breaking bones and mangling flesh. Hugh screams in agony before passing out from the pain. While the crew debates about entering the lab to help Hugh, Calvin manages to use a laboratory tool to puncture its sealed container. Now free, it immediately attacks a lab rat in the quarantine area, consuming it and growing even larger in the process. Seeing his colleague in danger, Rory impulsively enters the lab to rescue Hugh. He manages to retrieve Hugh's unconscious body, but as he tries to escape, Calvin latches onto his leg, trapping Rory inside to prevent Calvin from reaching the rest of the station. Trapped with the creature, Rory then grabs an oxygen candle and tries to burn Calvin off his leg. Calvin immediately jumps away and tries to hide. Commander Cat then gives permission to kill the creature. Rory attempts to kill it with a handheld flamethrower. Despite direct hits, Calvin appears immune to the flames. In a horrifying turn, Calvin climbs up Rory's body and forces its way into his mouth. The crew can only watch helplessly as Calvin kills Rory from the inside, consuming his organs and growing exponentially larger. When it emerges from Rory's lifeless body, Calvin has transformed into a translucent, star-shaped creature about the size of a small octopus. Using the chaos of the fire suppression system activating, Calvin escapes through an air vent into the station's main systems. The crew is now trapped with a nightmare hostile alien organism on the loose, and they need to find a way to contain or destroy Calvin before it can potentially reach Earth. Hugh, now recovered but severely injured, theorizes that Calvin went dormant on Mars due to the lack of breathable air. This gives the crew an idea. They could potentially render Calvin dormant again by removing oxygen from sections of the station. When the crew attempts to contact Earth for assistance, they discover their communication system has been damaged. Commander Cat volunteers for a spacewalk to repair the antenna. While outside the station, Calvin attacks her, damaging her spacesuit's coolant system. As the liquid begins filling her helmet, Cat makes a heroic decision. Rather than risk letting Calvin into the station, she seals herself outside the airlock, sacrificing herself to protect the rest of the crew. They watch in horror as she drowns in her own coolant fluid, her body drifting away into space. But their relief is short-lived when they spot Calvin clinging to the outside of the station, having survived the vacuum of space. Now desperate, the crew realizes Calvin is attempting to enter the station through the thruster vents. They try using the thrusters to blast Calvin away into deep space, but the alien clings tenaciously to the station. The repeated thruster firings deplete their fuel reserves and push the ISS into a decaying orbit. The station will eventually burn up in Earth's atmosphere, and if Calvin can survive re-entry, it could reach the planet's surface. Systems specialist Show calculates they need to use their remaining fuel to stabilize their orbit, even though doing so would allow Calvin back into the station. They seal themselves in one module of the station and vent the atmosphere from the rest, hopefully forcing Calvin into hibernation. Just as they're implementing this strategy, Hugh collapses. To everyone's horror, they discover Calvin has been hiding attached to Hugh's paralyzed leg, feeding off him without his knowledge due to his lack of sensation below the waist. As Hugh dies from blood loss, Calvin, now grown even larger, attacks the remaining crew members. In the chaos, Show seals himself inside a sleeping pod. Calvin attempts to break through the glass. Meanwhile, David and Miranda use Hugh's corpse as bait to lure Calvin away from Show and trap it in a separate module. They successfully seal Calvin in and begin venting the atmosphere, hoping to render it dormant. Just then, they receive word that a Soyuz capsule is approaching the station. Miranda reveals a terrible truth to David: this isn't a rescue mission. Having received only part of their distress call, Earth has implemented a fail-safe protocol. The Soyuz is on a one-way mission to push the entire station into deep space, ensuring Calvin can never reach Earth, even at the cost of the remaining crew. Unaware of this, Show sees the approaching capsule and believes rescue has arrived. He leaves his pod and rushes to the airlock, attempting to force open the hatch to the arriving ship. When he finally manages to open it, Calvin, who has survived the oxygen deprivation, attacks Show from behind. The violent encounter damages the docking connection, and the Soyuz crashes into the station before detaching and drifting away. David and Miranda, now the only survivors, face an impossible situation. They know Calvin could potentially survive atmospheric re-entry, meaning Earth itself is at risk. They formulate a desperate plan involving the station's 2 remaining escape pods. David will lure Calvin into one pod and pilot it into deep space, sacrificing himself while Miranda takes the other pod back to Earth to warn humanity. Miranda initially rejects the plan, not wanting to condemn David to death, but he convinces her that as a military veteran, he's always been prepared to die for the greater good. Besides, he admits he's never felt at home on Earth. His record-breaking time in space wasn't just about the mission. He genuinely prefers life among the stars. With time running out before the station burns up in the atmosphere, David begins implementing their plan. He places oxygen candles in a trail leading to his escape pod. As expected, Calvin quickly appears, following the oxygen trail as David makes his way to the pod. David reaches the pod with Calvin close behind, hungry for the oxygen he's carrying. As soon as he's inside, Calvin leaps onto him, wrapping itself around his body. David struggles but manages to seal the pod's hatch, trapping both himself and Calvin inside. Seeing that David has successfully captured Calvin, Miranda rushes to the second pod and sets course for Earth. She records a black box message, warning about Calvin's intelligence and deadly nature, advising that future Martian life should be considered extremely dangerous. Just as hope seems possible, disaster strikes again. Both escape pods are hit by debris from the damaged station. One pod is knocked off course while the other continues toward Earth. David struggles against Calvin's grip as it attacks him, wrapping itself around his body as he tries to maintain his course away from Earth. The Earthbound pod performs a controlled re-entry and splashes down in the Pacific Ocean near some Vietnamese fishermen. Fishing boats quickly spot the landing and they approach the floating pod to investigate. As they near the floating pod, we see through the window that it's David's pod that has returned to Earth. It's not Miranda's pod, and David is still alive inside. Through the window, we can see he is completely encased in Calvin's web-like substance. The creature has grown enormously, filling the entire pod. Meanwhile, Miranda's navigation system has failed, sending her pod drifting into the emptiness of deep space. Her fate is sealed. She will eventually run out of oxygen and die alone in the void. David desperately tries to warn the approaching fishermen not to open the pod, but they don't understand English and his warnings. We realize with horror that mankind's first contact with alien life is about to become mankind's last. Calvin has reached Earth, and nothing stands in the way of its conquest of our planet. The film ends as the Vietnamese fishermen finally manage to unlock the escape pod's hatch. This story shows just how fast curiosity can turn into chaos. Space isn't just stars and silence. It's full of surprises you really don't want knocking on your ship. So, what do you think about this movie? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like and subscribe for us to make more peak recaps for you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.